Yo, and the intro was for, hey, y'all crazy. Shalom, shalom. That intro is for all you haters, man. We going to continue to work. All I ask you to do, keep my name out your mouth, man. Y'all don't want me to appear like candy, man. But I'm here. I'm back again to give y'all this content, information. Today's topic, we're going to be dealing with the genetic imprint of the slave trade. I feel like it's a very pertinent topic that needs to be discussed because in the Israelite community, also in the Afrocentric community, in the Aboriginal community, there seems to be a confusion on who's who and where do we come from. What do I mean by this? The Afrocentric community will think that since we all were enslaved and we came off slave ships, that we're all the same. This sentiment is shared with the Israelite community because they will teach you that Deuteronomy 28:68 solidifies their Israelite ancestry. So they're saying anyone that fits the curses would be an Israelite. This is what happens when you don't allow yourself any wiggle room or you don't look at the gray area of an argument and everything's black or white. You create a false dichotomy. And then the Aboriginal community is saying something totally different. They're saying that we were always in America. We're autochthonous and indigenous to America. That's what they are teaching. That doctrine has no basis genetically at all. And I propose to all three communities, the Israelite community, Afrocentric community, and the Aboriginal community, to start diving into the field of genetics and examining genomic data. The reason why I am stating this, because the one field that can elucidate ancestry, that can clear up ancestry and pinpoint people groups and tell you who you are related to and where you go back to, is being ignored by all three groups. It's being ignored by Afrocentrics. It's being ignored by Israelites. It's being ignored by Aboriginals. Because once you start looking at the genetic matrices of people groups, African Americans or Africans in general, what you're going to find is that we do not all come back or go back to a common stock. We do not all share a common ancestry. This is also true for the slave trade. The slave trade is pretty much a hodgepodge of different groups. Now, you do have a majority, and we're going to discuss what haplogroup is the majority, but you do have other haplogroups and haplotypes that were enslaved as well. So I need you guys to strap in, you know what I'm saying? Put that seatbelt on and go on this ride with me. Because we're going to always push genetics to the forefront, because when we're talking about identifying people groups, you have to look into the field of genetics. You have to study DNA. You have to become cultured in order to understand these things. Or you can continue to do what these groups have been doing since the 80s, 70s, and 60s, just making blanket statements without any real, concrete, empirical data or evidence. Right. Shout out to my Yap gang in the building. Yap all day. Yap. We represent that Yap positive DE gang, E gang all day. Y'all know how we rocking, man. Hit that subscribe button and like the channel. Or hit the dislike. You don't gotta be here. you know how I'm rocking, man. Listen, we here. Yap gang is here to stay. Ramal Yahoo says, I found out some Africans are haplogroup R, while the others are indigenous Africans. We definitely different. Exactly. We're not the same. So we have a different paternal ancestry within these people groups. African Americans are not the same. Okay. So we're going to deal with that. And the information is going to elucidate and clear that up for anybody that may be confused on this topic. Because you've been told your whole life, well, one drop rule. The one drop rule is a racist legislation. It has nothing to do with science. The one drop rule, or the hypo descent law, racial purity law that was passed in the 20s, was passed and written up by people like Plecker to rid any Negroes or remove any financial benefit or gains from any Negroes that were associated with Indians or were identifying as Indians. That is facts. So when you go around saying one drop rule, that is a very hurtful and hateful law that was passed to depossess many Negroes of land, rights, and funds. Because I hear a lot of people say all it takes is one drop. No, it does not. That is a farce. That's a very racist, fascist law that was passed by Democrats, by the way. I've always put a name on it because what happens is people say, oh, well, this happened to us in the past. They never identify the people or political entity that did the thing. It's so convenient for you to just leave that part out. So be mindful of that when you're bringing up the one drop rule. Just look up the law of hypo descent, look up racial purity laws in the 20s, and you're going to see the origin of that term. And you should drop that term. It's a very horrendous term, if you ask me, when you know the history. With that being stated, back on the point, a lot of African American people are not the same genetically. This is something you have to come to grips with. This is something that you have to come to grips with. You cannot ignore genetics. We have a lot of males that are results of European men and African American women. We just have to accept that. And after that, European man got with that African woman and had that child, they may have married into the slave population, or they practice hypergamy. See, many people think hypergamy is only associated with females. That is not true. Especially during the colonial period and slave period, what you would find is a lot of these free blacks or children of these slave owners, when they got free and they got manumitted, because a lot of times that was the condition, they would go out and marry up in society. And how do you marry up in society where majority of your people are enslaved? You marry the whites, or you marry the Europeans in most cases. So this would cause a whiting out effect. We're going to discuss that. That happened a lot in South America. I'm trying to think of the Espanol, the word in Spanish. I think it's blanqueamiento. I think that's the term, the whitening. So what will happen is these freed slaves or manumitted through being a child of a slave owner would go out and marry other white people, and then you won't see physically the phenotype of their African ancestry and their progeny. We read an article a few videos back dealing with just that, where white individual, white European male, 99.7% autosomally European, but his Y paternal haplogroup was E1B1A. And he found out, he always heard whispers in his family that they'd go back to a freed black man during antebellum slavery, the follow. So what most likely happened was that free black man married up in society, hypergamy, and then that child married another white person. And then you keep going into present day, they look just like Europeans, although they share a common ancestry with a majority of African-American males. It's also why we did a video on the channel, phenotypes does not matter, because situations like that occur. So you have to be mindful of that. So everybody that looks the same, like the term says, all skin folk are not kinfolk. Everybody that is classified the same is not the same. We have to understand this Western system of race is a very fickle system, and it's not based on a biological unit or units. In other words, it has nothing to do with heredity, or it has nothing to do with ancestry. It has everything to do with social climate and social constructs. That's all it is. Emily Williams says, if true, is it safe to say I am an Israelite? What are you regarding to? I mean, what are you referring to? What are you saying here? I don't, what's true? Help me out here and I can give you an answer. All right. So we're going to get into the information and break down what haplogroups were associated with the slave trade. We're going to deal with the gene flow of certain groups. And some of you guys will be surprised. Some of you guys that have watched the show before, you may see your haplogroup up there being associated with the slave trade. We have to understand something. Slavery was a huge ordeal. And trying to minimize it to just one area, one group of people, is not historically accurate. We were getting slaves from Mozambique. We were getting slaves from East Africa. There were slaves coming from the Mediterranean. There were slaves in the beginning, from the onset, coming from Europe. And these slaves would have been called mulattoes today. Why? Because most of them had mixed ancestry. From the records that we have, we can clearly see that these people were either mixed Spanish descent, African descent. And these are your first slaves. They called them Latinos. Latinos were able to speak Spanish, Portuguese. They were cultured. They understood the religions. They understood the cultural attaches of Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. So they preferred to take those servants and bring them to America. So you have to also think of that component, which many of those slaves could have been Jews or Moors. You have to remember, from the onset of the slave trade, prior to going to Africa for slaves, they were depending on the Valencia market. Spain was the first people to engage in transporting peoples to America and slaves, because they are the first people to have the capital to do so. So they were bringing slaves from the Valencia market. They were buying their slaves from the Valencia market, who were filling the Valencia markets. When you do the research, the people that were filling the Valencia markets were a lot of Sephardic Jews, which is going to be a major talking point in this video, and I'm going to bring that up. A lot of you guys are going to get upset. Mainly you Afrocentrics. So anytime we talk about Jews and connecting them with us, you have a problem with it. But what you don't have a problem is that many of these people in your groups and on your channels have European haplogroups. Okay? Haplogroup I and haplogroup R. I've spoken to individuals, I don't have to say their names on here, that come from Rob Bourne's channel, Each One Teach One, and Garfield's channel. These dudes have European haplogroups. You have no issue with that. But when we tell you, hey, we have Jews with E markers, and we're trying to reestablish that relationship based on common ancestry, you open your mouth. This is the backward thinking of the black male here in America. And this is the result of poor education, which I want to help and contribute to the education of not only black people, but black men, because we suffer in that field and we need a stronger academic presence. For anyone that will be upset for what I'm about to reveal, like my last channel, all I got to say is this. This is who you guys represent, and this is how I see you guys. When you go in my comments, message me, hit me on the phone, bitching and moaning. This is you.
You looking at yourself crying in the mirror?
Shut the fuck up.
Oh my God.
That's you, man. That's you. All day. One more time.
You looking at yourself crying in the mirror?
Shut the fuck up.
Listen, y'all gonna have to stay mad and be mad. That's it. Just get upset. But we're gonna continue to grow, work, and provide information here. If you haven't joined the Facebook group, Genesis 49ers Resources, you are doing yourself a disservice. I've been pretty dedicated in updating that, providing sources so you can follow along. When I make a video, 9 times out of 10, information is already on the resource page with relevant material based on whatever video that I'm dropping. So this video, for instance, I will be putting source material on the genetic imprint of the slave trade in the resources throughout the week. You understand? Exactly. Stay mad and stay crying. We will provide the Kleenexes for you. All right, so let's get into the sources. I did enough, build up. Let's get into the source information and start talking about the topic, the genetic imprint of the slave trade. Before we get into it, I have a favor to ask you guys. Can you please just do this one thing for me?
Hi, everybody. Time to use your noggin. How do you use your noggin, you say? Well, here's how you use it every day. Use your noggin when you write a letter. Use your noggin when you make it better. Use your noggin when you play guitar. Use your noggin to spot a star. Use your noggin when you make a scene. Use your noggin when you mix up green. Use your noggin to when you use your noggin, it's never the same. Use your noggin to sing a song. Ask another noggin to sing along. Use your noggin with your computer. Hey, that's Z. What could be cuter? Use your noggin. That's what it's for.
I'm using my noggin.
Are you using yours?
Are you using yours? Use your noggin, people. Use your noggin. All right, before I get into the information, I want to address what this Terry just said. And Emily, I don't know your question. You're saying please answer. And here's another thing for anybody that's new to the channel. Save your questions and answers for the end segment. Then I'll be able to hone in and focus on it, because what I'm about to do, I'm about to read these articles, and while reading, I'm not going to see your comments or your questions. So if you wait to the end of the presentation and the information is finished, then pose your question and I will answer it. Let me see. I don't see any question here, Emily. You didn't give any clarity to what you were saying. If you could just repose your question, it will be addressed. Now I want to address what this guy said. He said, my haplogroup is QM242, but megapopulation is Iberian Peninsula. My parents' European index both say Portugal. Dr. Donald Yates, owner of DNA Consultant, said my dad is from the Tartar Jews. I would have to look at what clade of Q that you have. But if you have the clade that is associated with indigenous Americans, you're most definitely not a Jew. But if you have the clade of Q that was in the Middle East, what could have happened is that one of your ancestors either converted or was absorbed into a Jewish or Israelite population. Because there is no consanguinity amongst Jewish populations. They have many haplogroups. This means a bunch of males aggregated together. Okay, so your paternal lineage probably was absorbed or adopted into some Jewish group. That's how you explain that. You all can't be descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they will have one major chromosome, one major haplogroup. Let me ask a few more questions before I start. Emily Williams, I don't see your original question. I don't know what you mean by what you said. If true, is it safe to say I'm an Israelite? I don't know what you mean by that. You're going to give clarity. And I'll probably answer it at the end. So you can also reach out to us. Yes, exactly. Let Let me answer this real quick, then I'll move on. Mr. Forgiven says, peace. How do I find out my haplogroup? The sister gave you a link there, 23andMe. I recommend that because I actually did 23andMe, and they give you a haplogroup and give you some nice information. Also, you can find out who your closest relatives are through 23andMe. So just go to 23andMe. I think they're having a sale right now. You can purchase the DNA kit for $50, I think now, unless the sale has ended. But they have sales all the time around holidays. So if you want to wait until, you know, the upcoming holiday at the end of the month or next month, you can get it for a nice price. Ramal Yahoo says she didn't ask the question. I don't see the question. I don't know what she wants me to answer, bro. And what she said was it's unintelligible. I don't know what she's trying to say. All right. Now, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. First article that we're going to bring up to give the historical backdrop is the title. Is the article is the article that inspired the title. All right. So, wrong one. Let's go back. Let's go to the genetic imprint or impact of African slave trade revealed in genetic study. If my computer will cooperate, you guys should be able to see it here in a minute. Right here on BBC News. All right. Let me blow this up so you guys can see it. This is the article here. Genetic impact of African slave trade revealed in DNA study. July 24, 2020 is when it was published. It says, a major DNA study has shed new light on the fate of millions of Africans who were traded as slaves to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries. More than 50,000 people took part in the study, which was able to identify more details of the genetic impact the trade has had on present-day populations in the Americas. It lays bare the consequences of rape, maltreatment, disease, and racism. I want you guys to keep in mind the rape component because there's a lot of African Americans that are walking around that are European descent on their paternal side. Some on their maternal side, but most likely on the paternal side because there was a sex bias gene flow into America, especially in South America. You had more males coming in because the Spanish and the Portuguese and people from the Iberian Peninsula believe in blanqueamiento, which is the whitening of the population. They made sure they came in and there were more females to males. I think 17 to 15 females to every one male, African male in South America or in the Latin countries. They made sure it was disproportionate. So these males would come in and admix with these females. It says more than 12.5 million Africans were traded between 1515 and the mid-19th century. Some 2 million of the enslaved men, women, and children died en route to the Americas. The DNA study was led by consumer genetics company 23andMe and included 30,000 people of African ancestry on both sides of the Atlantic. The findings were published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. Stephen Micheletti, a population geneticist at 23andMe, told AFP news agency that the aim was to compare the genetic results with the manifest of slave ships to see how they agreed and how they disagreed. While much of their findings agree with historical documentation about where people were taken from in Africa and where they were enslaved in the Americas, in some cases we see that they disagree. Quite strikingly, he added. Now, before I finish this, I want to make a note here for all of my Aboriginal viewers that may support Dane Calloway or, his cohorts or proponents of that belief. You do realize that we are genetically connected to several African populations, which would mean that there's no way that we all had our genesis in the Americas. And again, I can't stress this enough. You need to study genetics. You state your premise, then you give evidence, and then you state your conclusion. Does the evidence agree with your premise or your hypothesis? And if it doesn't, you have to drop your premise or change or alter your premise or alter your hypothesis. This is the scientific method. All right, so let that be noted for all the brothers and sisters that's pushing for this Aboriginal doctrine. As the study found, in line with the major slave route, that most Americans of African descent have roots in territories now located in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. As I just stated, this disproves or debunks anyone saying that we had our genesis in America. What was surprising was that the overrepresentation of Nigerian ancestry in the U.S. and Latin America when compared with the recorded number of slave people from that region. Researchers say this can be explained by the intercolonial trade that occurred primarily between 1619 and 1807. Now, this is huge, and I may cover this in a later date. A lot of people don't understand. A lot of people do not understand that the slave trade was nuanced. Everybody was not being shipped directly from West Africa to North America or, plug in any place in Caracayo or something like that. No, they had re-exportations. Like Cape Verde will be a re-exportation island. In the Caribbeans, you would go to the Caribbeans and then get re-exported from the Caribbean. So if you want to know the background on a lot of these slaves, a lot of times you have to look at the circum-Caribbean and start there, because slaves would come from Africa, land in one of like San Juan or something like that, Santo Domingo or Jamaica. They would land there, and then they would be resold and re-exported to the colonies. You follow me? I say that because there are a lot of people that claim to be Afrocentrics that don't understand that part of history. So when we bring up our argument for Sephardic Jews being flooded in the Caribbean, they say, well, why are you not dealing with America? Well, a lot of these Jews could have gene flow from the Caribbean to America. It's very plausible if you understand the slave trade. So let me read again. Researchers say this can be explained by the intercolonial trade that occurred primarily between 1619 and 1807. As you can see, the trade routes where they would primarily be being taken from here in Americas, the Congo region, the Gold Coast, so on and so forth, the Windward Coast, and where they were being exported to here in this nice map here. Average African ancestry of present-day populations of African descent. It gives you percentage. Notice Mexico. Look at Mexico, man. They're struggling, 0 to 10%. Then when you get to South America, Central America, it increases. And of course, you're going to see a lot in the circum-Caribbean. Why? Because the history I just told you, this was a spot, a locality of re-exportation. That's why it's 35 to 50% throughout the circum-Caribbean. Places like Cuba, Haiti, Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, right? As you can see, Brazil. You can see that red area too. What is red? 60 to 70%. And we're going to deal with Bolivia as well. So let me go down. They believe enslaved Nigerians were transported from the British Caribbean to other areas. And this is what I was just bringing out. Presumably to maintain the slave economy, as transatlantic slave trading was increasingly prohibited. Likewise, the researchers were surprised to find an underrepresentation from Senegal and the Gambia, one of the first regions from where slaves were deported. Researchers put this down to two grim factors. Many were sent to work in rice plantations where malaria and other dangerous conditions were rampant. And in later years, larger numbers of children were sent, many of whom did not survive the crossing. It says in another gruesome discovery, the study found that the treatment of enslaved women across the Americas had had an impact on the modern gene pool. Researchers said a strong bias towards African female contributions in gene pool, even though the majority of slaves were male, could be attributed to the rape of enslaved African women by slave owners and other sexual exploitation. So remember, this is what was going on during this time, and this is why in present day populations, especially of African American progeny, these people could very well be descendants of Europeans, and this is why I advocate everyone to get your DNA test. We have the technology, okay? It says in Latin America, up to 17 African women for every African man contributed to the gene pool. So that's a ratio of 17-1. It says researchers put this down in part to a policy of branqueamiento, racial whitening, in a number of countries which actively encourage the immigration of European men with the intention to dilute African ancestry through reproduction. This is this history I was telling you guys you need to learn. And this will also explain why some of the cultural attaches of Latin countries are very colorist and very racist, because they have had this long culture of a caste system that goes back to colonial times, and they based it on skin color. So it's no wonder to see people like Dominicans having racist sentiments for black people overall, even though Dominicans look and act like niggas. I can't give you another scholastic or academic term. That's the best way I can explain it to you. They look and act like niggas, but they hold racist sentiments towards other African or black groups. And this seems to be a psychological leftover from the colonial period with this branqueamiento and the caste system that was being imposed in the Americas, especially in the Latin regions. We keep going. It says, although the bias in British colonized America was just 2 African women to 1 African man, it was no less exploitive. The study highlighted the practice of coercing enslaved people to having children as a means of maintaining an enslaved workforce nearing the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. In the U.S., women were often promised freedom in return for reproducing, and racist policies opposed the mixing of different races, researchers note. So again, some cases, these women will be manumitted and their children will be manumitted. All right? Some of these children grew up to become slave owners themselves. That's a part of history. Let me keep going. I don't care about the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't know why they included this, but I'll read it for the sake of the article. It says the Black Lives Matter movement has shone a light on the damaging legacy of the colonialism and slavery on African Americans and other people of African heritage around the world. Statues of colonial era slave traders have been pulled down as protesters demand the end of glorifying the symbols of slavery. Again, I do not endorse BLM. They're a Trojan horse organization, and they're race hustlers. They're just using the idea of racism and a fight against racism as a social justice warrior tactic to funnel funds into their own pockets. That's for another video. I'm not going to go there or here. We're going to stick on the topic. This is the genetic imprint of the slave trade. So from there, I want you guys to follow along. I also want to send you guys a PSA before we finish. I got a public service announcement for you guys. So I always remind y'all that a lot of our black males are illiterate here in America, and I promote literacy. This channel is pro-literacy. So I'm going to need you guys to do something for me, man. I'm gonna need you guys to apply.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow.
Right. I need you guys to start, strengthening those reading habits, man. It's in a book. Take a look. All right, let me read some of these comments as I go. See, I'm starting to flood. It says, if you look at the slave database, it shows that most Israelites were sent to West Indies and Brazil, South America, North America had a percentage of Israelites and had mostly indigenous Africans. That's true. Sephardic Jews were on those ships mostly. That's why Afro-Brazilians speak Portuguese. Now, what Ramal Yahoo is referring to, I covered this in a video. I believe it's Black Jews. I'll pull it up at the end. I can't think of the name of it. Black Jews 2021 or something like that, where you can see that there were Sephardic Jews being enslaved. And I have a source that I'm going to deal with that's going to deal with the Sephardic Jew introgression into the slave trade as well. So just hold on, family. We're going to get there eventually. All right. So the next, let me close that window. The next article I want to deal with is, do I want to deal with the genomic legacy or, so I'm going to deal with a couple countries to give you an example of what was going on here with the transatlantic slave trade and its genetic impact. All right, so I think I'll deal with this one because it's pretty much covering a lot of ground. All right, so let's go to the next article. Exactly, I'll kind of take a look. It's in a book. Told you this channel is pro literacy. We're trying to push literacy to the four corners of the earth. All right, so as you guys can see on the page, the genetic consequences of the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas. And this is from ScienceDirect.com. Stephen J. Micheletti et al. This was mentioned in reference in the article we just read from BBC. It says, according to the historical records of transatlantic slavery, traders forcibly deported an estimated 12.5 million people from ports along the Atlantic coastline. From the All right, I'm back, y'all. I'm so sorry about that, man. My my Google Chrome decided to crash on me. You know what I'm saying? Like, who called the ADL on me, man? I'm upset right now, man. Who called the ADL? Man, I apologize about that. I don't know where I left off at, so I'm just gonna start at the beginning of the article. Man, let's see. 3:49 is when it dropped out, so about 3 minutes. All right, so let me get back to the article that I was bringing up. The problem is all of my tabs are gone now. Yeah, I know, man. Like, damn. Like, so who called the ADL on me, man? Sheesh. And let me pull my article back up and share it on the stream. That's a big blow because I had all of my articles on tabs. So all I had to do was just click the tab. But now that kind of put a damper on things. So that's fine. That's fine. We'll pick up where we left off. That's fine. Yeah, that's true. I'll pull them from the history. All right. So let me get back to the Chrome tab. Okay. I don't know if you heard me read this or how much I got into this before I went out. So I'm just going to read it again. This is from the article Genetic Consequences of the Transatlantic Slave Trade in the Americas. Stephen J. Micheletti et al. Says here, according to historical records of transatlantic slavery, traders forcibly deported an estimated 12.5 million people from ports along the Atlantic coastline of Africa between the 16th and 19th centuries, with global impacts reaching to the present day more than a century and a half after slavery's abolition. Such records have fueled a broad understanding of the forced migration from Africa to the Americas, yet remain underexplored in the concert with genetic data. Here we analyze genotype array data from 50,000 research participants, which combined with historical shipping documents illustrate that the current genetic landscape of the Americas is largely concordant with expectations derived from documentation of slave voyages. For instance, genetic connections between people in slave trading regions of Africa and disembarkation regions of the Americas generally mirror the proportion of individuals forcibly moved between those regions. While some discordance can be explained in additional records of deportation within the Americas, other discordance yield insights into variable survival rates and timing of arrival of enslaved people from specific regions of Africa. Furthermore, the greater contribution of African women to the gene pool compared to African men varies across the Americas, consistent with literature documenting regional differences in slavery practices. This investigation of the transatlantic slave trade, which is broad in scope in terms of both dataset and analysis, established genetic links between individuals in the Americas and populations across Atlantic Africa. Okay, so you guys can see this. So again, this is what was referred to in the article we just read. And basically it's saying a lot of the same things. Again, the women outnumbering the men, which will contribute to a sex bias gene flow on the European side. And this is what explains, this is why there's a considerable proportion of African American males that have European Y chromosomes. Meaning, if you wind the clock back far enough, if you jump into the not the Mandalorian, what's that from Back to the Future? You guys know what I'm referencing. If you jump into that and you go all the way back, 500 years, 600 years, these people will morph into the same Europeans that are causing the oppression or involved or related to the people that are causing this oppression or enacting the slave trade. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow for Afrocentrics, especially some of you loud and boisterous Afrocentrics that think that you're, up in arms and you're really supporting the people. I know that's hard to swallow. but it's just a genetic fact. It's a scientific fact. This doesn't, it's not relative to your feelings. So let that be noted as well. Another thing for the Aboriginal community, again, as we're going to reestablish throughout this video, we have genetic proof that we are related to West Africans, West and Central Africans, and East Africans too. Therefore, we do not have a genesis in the Americas. We're not autochthonous to the Americas. We know what haplogroup was autochthonous. I just covered that on the genetics of Native Americans and Hispanics. You can check that video out on your free time and take notes. Let me keep going. The introduction. The forced displacement of more than 12.5 million men, women, and children from Africa to the Americas between 1515 and 1865 has had a significant social, cultural, health, and genetic impact across the Americas. The consequences of this displacement are a myriad and complex, reflecting the very economic goals and practices of the nations outfitting the ships that transported captive Africans. The current narrative of this era of forced deportation has been compiled from thousands of historical shipping documents, as well as diaries, personal letters, sketches, and records of slave sales. These data suggest that the number of enslaved people disembarking at each port in the Americas, the nation that shipped enslaved people to a given port, and the populations and geographic locations in Africa from which captives were taken differs from region to region within the Americas. For example, shipping manifests indicate that the number of enslaved people disembarking at Brazilian and Caribbean ports was far greater than the number disembarking at other ports in the Americas. An estimated 10.1 million enslaved people, primarily male, disembarked in Central America, South America, and Caribbean, accounting for more than 90% of all captives who were brought to the Americas, with fewer than 500,000 disembarking in the mainland North America, 3 to 5% of the total. Concurrent with transatlantic voyages, slave traders also transferred nearly 500,000 enslaved people throughout the Americas, with most documented intra-American voyages originating in the Caribbean. Again, as we made a note earlier, there was a re-exportation going on from the Caribbeans. So you would be sold to the Caribbean, then re-exported to another locality like South America or North America. It says, despite a majority of enslaved Africans disembarking in Latin America, estimates of proportion of African ancestry for Latin Americans with African roots are lower on average than estimates of African Americans in the United States. Why is this the case? We read this already, because in North America, it was the female ratio was 2 to 1 for every male. But in Latin America, the average ratio was 17 to 1. So there's going to be lower Y chromosomes in Latin regions. This is why you see a 5 to 10% African ancestry in Mexico. It's because of that discrepancy in female to male slaves. 17 to 1. It says further patterns of embarkation of enslaved populations varied over time, whereby people primarily from 48 distinct ethno-linguistic groups were targeted across Atlantic Africa. Prior to 1650, slave voyages most often originated in Senegambia in West Central Africa, and locations now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola. Although West Central Africa remained a primary embarkation region throughout the slave trading period, from 1650 to 1850, these voyages originated with increasing frequencies at ports in the Bight of Benin and the Bight of Biafra, and locations now known as Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon, which I believe EU 290, what I have, is related to a lot of people from Cameroon. While records have shed light on the main trends of the transatlantic slave trade, the effects of underdocumented practices such as illegal slave trading and details of events after disembarkation in the Americas remain less understood. If underdocumented events did not shift the overall paradigm of the slave trade and reproduction rates were equivalent among enslaved populations in the Americas, the degree of genetic similarity between the Americas and each slave trading region of Africa would be expected to be correlated with the recorded number of enslaved people that disembarked into each region. Also, little is known about the extent to which enslaved people and their descendants continue to associate exclusively with those of similar ethno-linguistic origins after generations in the Americas. Now, this is a point that I need the Afrocentrics to pay attention to. There is a discontinuity with people from West Africa and the Americas. Yes, you have Candomblé in South America. Yes, you have Santeria in the Caribbean. You do have these things. Yes, you have some semblance of African culture within the Gullah, North America. But by and large, there is a discontinuity between descendants of slaves and what the West Africans were practicing in the culture that they kept to the Americas. I don't know why this is a hard concept for people to get. We do not, by and large, keep the same culture that the West Africans kept back then in pre-colonial Africa. Why? Because our history was getting erased. We were getting taken into captivity, and we had to adopt the culture of the dominant peoples. This is the dominant influence model. This is what happened. This is why we all speak in North America primarily English. This is why we keep Americana traditions. A lot of you guys celebrate Christmas, Thanksgiving. You pop firecrackers on July 4th, Memorial Day, so on and so forth. You dress like an American. You speak like an American because of this discontinuity. A lot of people in the Afrocentric community does not understand that concept. I say this to say this. When you look at our argument for a Jewish or Semitic claim, they always say, where's the culture? There was a discontinuity with that as well. What was going on in the colonial period? The Inquisition would not allow to openly profess yourself as a Jew, one, or keep Judaic practices. This extended to Latin America, and we've done videos on this, but I thought it necessary. I deemed it necessary to bring it up now. Same thing happened with those groups. They got discontinued from their culture. So this is why you go to Jamaica, there's a lot of people with Jewish or Sephardic names, but nothing about them culture-wise is Judaic. Discontinuity. This happened to us as a whole, not just people that had Jewish practices, Islamic practices as well, other African traditions as well. A lot of that stuff became evanescent and faded during the slave trade. I want you guys to make note of that because that is a big issue. There's people out there right now that don't understand that. They think culture is like genes. When your father and your mother got together, he did not pump culture into her womb. That's what you learn while you're walking the earth. And whatever the dominant culture is, 9 times out of 10, you're going to follow that. This is why there's a huge discontinuity from what the Africans kept or what the ancestors of the slave trade kept and what modern African Americans keep. I know some of you guys are watching like, oh, that should be self-explanatory. Hey, but you got grown men on here making silly arguments and assertions based on that. So let that be noted. Again, it says also little is known about the extent to which enslaved people and their descendants continue to associate exclusively with those of similar ethno-linguistic origins after generations in the Americas. If such association was common, Americans with African roots would be expected to have African ancestry from a single region of Africa in a pattern that is correlated with geography. Finally, previous studies indicate that individuals with mixed ancestry have higher levels of African ancestry in genomic regions inherited through the female line. Again, what does that mean? Why do you have higher African ancestry on the maternal line? Because the paternal line is most likely European. Some cases, ancient Paleo-American. Some. You have a very small component. You do have African Americans that actually do go back to ancient Americans. They have Q and C. We're going to touch on that later. All right, let me keep going. However, the extent of the sex bias and gene pool contributions may vary across the Americas due to regional differences in mortality of enslaved men, rape of enslaved African women, forced segregation, and practices of reducing African representation by promoting reproduction with Europeans. Racial whitening, what we brought out earlier, what was being practiced by the people that were coming from the Iberian Peninsula. Again, which explains the racist and colorist narratives that come out of the mouth of a lot of these Latinos, such as Faithful to God, such as Jose Reyes, Ancient Watchmen. All they're doing is revitalizing these arguments that they got from their forefathers. I'm going to stand on that because we have a history, we have documentation of these people from the Iberian Peninsula, proliferating the Americas with this ideology and this thought. Previous genetic studies focusing on people of African descent across the Americas found that most African Americans in the United States have more African ancestry from population that live near present-day Nigeria than from population that lived elsewhere in the Atlantic Africa. However, multiple previous studies have lacked representation of West Central Africa, the largest source of enslaved people during the transatlantic slave trade, leading to an incomplete understanding of the dynamics of population interactions during and after the slave trade era. Here we combine genetic data from individuals representing the major slave trading regions of Atlantic Africa, Europe, and the Americas and explored concordance with centuries of historical documents. We determine ancestral connections using identity by descent, local ancestry inference, and the Bayesian dating techniques. If you don't know who the Bayesian dating technique derives from, you should look him up. He was a Christian that lived in the 18th century. A lot of this scientific field, this is sidebar, not on topic. A lot of the stuff that we see that influenced the scientific field, as we know it today, comes from the mind of theists. Science is not owned by atheists. I want people to know that. Modern science comes from the minds of theists. The scientific method, the Bayesian dating technique, the Bayesian technique itself, that comes from the minds of theists. So I just want to throw that out there because you got some people saying science is for materialists, and that is false. In addition, we use ancestral admixture models to estimate the bias in the gene pool contributions of African, European, and indigenous American men and women to current populations of the Americas. We use data from this large, diverse cohort of individuals to obtain unprecedented insights into the genetic impact of the transatlantic slave trade. All right. So when I go to the subject and methods, I'm not going to read all of the technical stuff, okay, because we're going to fall on deaf ears. There's no point. I just want you guys to get the pertinent information. All right. So I'll probably read this right here, the human subject. So they said we included data from participants drawn from the millions of research participants of 23andMe, a consumer personal genetics company. Anyone asking where do you get your DNA and haplogroups from, go through 23andMe. I use them. Very good service. It says the 1,000 Genomes Project, the Human Genome Diversity Project, Angola, and previous studies, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sierra Leone, and the Khoisan-speaking people. Angolan participants' saliva samples were collected with research consent, which was approved by both ethics committee of the University of Lebanon in November. So I'll just read that so you can see where they got that. I also want to read this as well because that's pertinent information here. We grouped individuals across the Americas, Atlantic Africa, and Western Europe into cohorts designed to reflect historical regions. Within the United States, we focus solely on the coastal surrounding states known to have been disembarkation locations for enslaved people. We included the Cape Verde Archipelago as a control region since it's an Atlantic African country that was colonized by the Portuguese in the 15th century and has been inhabited primarily by descendants of enslaved people from Senegambia. In Africa, we merged contemporary administrative borders and to match all major slave trading regions during the transatlantic slave trade, except Southeast Africa, which constituted about 3.8% of all African embarkments due to limited sample representation of Mozambique and Madagascar. So I wanted to bring this out to the forefront because you do have some slaves coming from the east, Mozambique and Madagascar, which would explain some Asian haplogroups, which would explain some E1B1B haplotypes as well, which we're going to touch on as well. Let me keep reading, or we can skip to the bottom. It says, because records constitute numbers of captives deported by region of purpose as opposed to ethno-linguistic affiliation, merging geographic boundaries in this manner allow us to connect people of African descent directly to slave trading regions from which their African ancestors may have embarked. Borders of Atlantic African countries generally align with those historical slave trading regions. However, we split Nigeria into western and eastern states along the Niger River because enslaved people from the east of the Niger were deported from ports in the Bight of Biafra, whereas people west of the Niger were deported from ports in the Bight of Benin. Categorizing Nigeria in this way also corresponds to the historical geographic occupancy of groups with genetic, ethnic, and linguistic differences. In the Yoruba, in the Bight of Benin, the Isan, and the Igbo in the Bight of Biafra. We consider current Atlantic African populations to be suitable proxies for past populations in Africa, given limited migration and current population structure following a latitudinal gradient. We combine regions of Europe participating in the transatlantic slave trade by broad historical descriptors and population structure, which are largely described by geographic proximity. And they give you a graphic of the embarkments, where they were coming from, disembarkments and embarkments. As you can see, Central Africa, the Windward Coast, Gold Coast, the Ghanaian region. You can see it disembark. What's interesting about this map, y'all notice, what's this over here? You do have disembarkments from here as well. So keep that in mind. Also, we covered in a video before the first slaves coming from the Iberian Peninsula, Latinos being the first slaves being sold to the Caribbean. All right, so let's go down. It talks about the triangle trade route. I don't want to bring that up. I want to keep going. I want to get to the juicy parts because I want to bring out other articles. Genotyping, population structure, voyage records. It says we access transatlantic historical records from the Slave Voyages database. The Slave Voyage database contains a collection of records from a wide range of published and archival information on more than 36,000 voyages across the Atlantic between 1492 and early 19th century. The database contains more than 100 possible variables for each voyage, including voyage dates, disembarkation, embarkation, ports, crew information, and voyage outcomes. Some records that lack pertinent data were imputed using information such as carrying capacity of vessels and characteristics of similar documented voyages. Using the Slave Voyage database, we compiled estimates of enslaved African embarkations, imputed total slaves disembarked exact. Proportion of males imputed percentage male exact, and proportion of children imputed percentage child exact for each Atlantic African imputed principal region of slave purchase laying in exact. An American region, I'm going to skip this. It says, for disembarkation estimates of enslaved Africans into the Americas, we mapped the principal port of disembarkation and or principal region of disembarkation to American regions and grouped by Atlantic African region. We estimated shipment sex bias using the voyage percent, males on field, and shipment age bias using the voyage percent, children on the field. We similarly utilized the intra-American slave trade database, which contains records of voyages within the regions of Americas that occurred in tandem with the transatlantic slave trade. We aggregated estimates of number of enslaved people forcibly deported between regions in the Americas using the imputed and total disembarked, imputed principal place of purchase, and imputed principal place of slave landing fields. All right, so I don't want to bore you guys with the technical talk. I want to get to the meat and potatoes of this. Let me see. Let me go down. Right here, identity by descent. We estimated identity by descent within between peoples represented regions in the Americas, Atlantic Africa, and Western Europe using the software package Refine IBD. We first removed all missing positions and subset markers to the intersection between all platforms, resulting in 87,000 unique positions used in all IBD analysis. While lowering S&P density may reduce the ability to detect. Again, there's more technical talk. I want you guys to get the actual time to the recent common ancestor. I might have to skip to the discussion, man. Let me see. Ancestral sex bias. We discussed this. There are more females in Latin America to males. That's basically what that's breaking down to. The results. Let's see if this is pertinent. If not, I'm going to move on. Results. The Bayesian variations of African ancestry across the Americas. It says our estimations of African ancestry with 23andMe ancestry inference algorithm indicated that the mean sub-Saharan African ancestry in Americans with less than 5% African ancestry was highest in the British Caribbean, with 76% plus or minus 20.3%. The United States, 71%. The Guyana's 59%, Cape Verde 45%. Mean sub-Saharan African ancestry was lowest in Latin America. Again, why? Because there were more of a sex-biased gene flow going on with the slave trade there. You had more females, African females compared to African males. So, of course, we expect to see this. And then you had blancamiento happening where the European males were mixing with these African women to wipe out the gene pool. And it worked because when we see Latin Caribbean, and for all the people that are watching that may be of Hispanic and Native American descent, my video was not an attack to everybody. It's just from a place of truth. When you see numbers like this, the people that are calling themselves Hispanic, you have to take this into consideration. A lot of you guys that are Hispanic are the products of these unions. It's just that simple. All right. Let me keep going. So let's look at the estimation of African ancestry within Latin Caribbeans. So Latin Caribbeans, 20% plus or minus 12.9%. Central South American, 13.7% plus or minus 10.5%. Northern South America, 11.9% plus or minus 8.1%. And Central America plus Mexico, 8.9% plus or minus 8.7%. These proportions also correspond with the proportion of African haplogroups in each region. It says these proportions also correspond with the proportion of African haplogroups in each region. So what does that mean? For anybody that's pushing and supporting the 12 tribes chart, and this is why I eventually dropped that, because when we look at the genetic matrices of these people, it doesn't correlate. In order to say that we all come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we'll have to share the same haplogroup. There's no way around it. And you guys want to include all these other haplogroups like Ronald Dalton, it just doesn't work. And when we look at the Hispanics, we know where their haplogroups came from. A lot of this European gene flow came from the Iberian Peninsula. A lot of our gene flow came from Western and Central Africa. Some of us came from the East, as we discussed earlier. A lot of us have E markers. We inherited E markers, meaning we share common ancestry with males that lived in the past that had E markers. We don't share common ancestry or male ancestry with people that lived in the past and had I markers or J markers or R markers, which this is what we see in Western Europe. We don't. Therefore, the 12 tribes chart cannot be taken on face value because the 12 tribe chart precludes that all of those groups have a common male ancestor in Abraham. It does not work genetically. So this is why Israelites want to steer clear of the genetic argument and understanding genetic data. It's for reasons like this, because we don't all share the same haplogroup, which means what? We don't all share the same Y chromosome, which means what? I'm going to put this in the most lamest terms that I can. We don't all come from the ball sack of Abraham. We didn't come from that sperm because it had the Y chromosome. It's that simple. as you can see with the low African ancestry within Latin America, and we gave you the history on why there's a low African ancestry within throughout Latin America is because of the sex bias gene flow, where a majority of the slaves were females. Estimated proportion of African ancestry across Atlantic Africa, the Americas, and Europe. The mean proportions of continent-level African ancestry in each region. So it's breaking down this graph here. You guys can open this article up and read this graph yourself. And it will show you what places have the most African ancestry and whatnot. All right. So within the 23andMe ancestry composition hierarchy, there are 4 local ancestries corresponding to regions in Atlantic Africa. Nigerian, Senegambian, which is Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Coastal West African, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and Congolese, Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo. Ancestry inferences in the Americas reveal that the majority of individuals within the United States, 93%, as well as from British and French Caribbean, 82%, tend to have ancestry from all 4 of these Atlantic African populations, with Nigerian being the most common of the 4. So this was discussed earlier as well. We see in North America and the Caribbean getting the most African ancestry, and we also see that they have a more diverse African ancestry within, which contains all of these regions. It says a high proportion of individuals from the Guyanas, or the Guyana, excuse me if I'm butchering that, 64% in the Latin Caribbean, 44% also have ancestry from all 4 populations, with coastal West African ancestry in the Guyanas being most common relative to other Atlantic African ancestries, and Senegambian being most common in Latin Caribbean. The plurality, 47% of Mexican and Central American individuals have only Senegambian ancestry, whereas 32% of individuals from North and South America have both Senegambian and Nigerian ancestry. In Central South America, the plurality, 31% of individuals having only Congolese ancestry. Again, it's touching on the biases and contributions of males and females to current gene pools. We identified the bias towards European male and African female genetic contributions across regions of Americans using the sex-specific model of admixture, which assumes admixture events during the transatlantic slave trade. We observe an African female bias in every region of the Americas, with highest levels in North and South America. We also observe European males sex bias in all explored regions except Latin Caribbean and Central America. Additionally, haplogroup assignments in males indicated the Y chromosome haplogroup tend to be of European origin. Listen to what I'm saying to y'all. Maybe this is becoming white noise. So let me reiterate what I just read. It says here that in these Latin countries, the haplogroups, the Y chromosome haplogroup, the male paternal side, tends to be of African origin across all of the Americas. Hold on, let me read that again. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I read the wrong line. Haplogroup assignments in males indicated that the Y chromosome haplogroups tend to be of European origin, whereas mitochondrial haplogroups tend to be of African origins across the regions of Americas. So, as I've been saying, if we wind the clock back on a lot of these people would go back to the European males that were coming from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and other European localities, and imposing slavery and enacting these policies, being a part of blanqueamiento, right? Or blanqueamiento, however you say it, right? Being a part of this great whitening and spreading these ideas. This is history. You guys can get upset, but this is what happened. This is what was being stated. This is, again, and this is why all 3 groups, Israelite, Afrocentric, and Aboriginals, don't like talking about DNA. This is why, because this information cuts to their heart. There's a bias to Y chromosome haplogroups that tend to be European. Historical documents indicate overall proportion of enslaved people on voyages were male across all regions. All right, and they have charts here to give you percentages. Go on. Discussion. Overall concordance with historical documents. We found that overall genetic evidence of Atlantic African ancestry across the Americas is consistent with the historical documents of the transatlantic shipping of enslaved Africans. What does that mean also? So for the crowds that are, for the people that are watching that may be Aboriginal, not only do we have documentation of a slave trade occurring, a transatlantic slave trade occurring, we also have the genetic evidence to back up the documentation. Why do I bring that out? Because there are proponents of Dane Calloway and others that are going around social media making the claim that the slave trade never happened. We can clearly see with empirical data that this is not true. Again, we found that overall genetic evidence of Atlantic African ancestry across the Americas is consistent with historical documents of the transatlantic shipping of enslaved Africans. The expectation that more embarkation out of Africa corresponds with more ancestral connections to the Americas is borne, meaning carried out by the comparison between IBD Africa Americas, which IBD means identification by descent, and the number of captives deported from each African region. For example, the highest proportion of IBD is found between West Central Africa and the Americas, consistent with the highest proportion of enslaved embarkations from this slave trading region, 5.7 million people. West Central Africa also experienced the largest proportion of deportations in the mid-1800s, consistent with our finding that people of African descent in the Americas share the most recent common ancestors with people of West Central Africa. So again, public service announcement again to the Aboriginal community. You can't escape this. We share direct ancestry with Western Central Africans. Therefore, we cannot have our genesis in America. We are not autochthonous to America. That's how you falsify that. It says the mean number of IBD connections between regions of the Americas and Africa also support embarkation estimates from voyage records. The majority of enslaved people arriving in Latin America, Latin Caribbean, Central America, North South America, and Central South America were generally deported from one or two slave trading regions, whereas enslaved people arriving in the United States and British Caribbean were taken from all regions of Atlantic Africa. Consequently, individuals from Latin America tend to have IBD with 2 or 3 Atlantic African regions, whereas individuals from the United States and the Caribbean tend to have genetic connections to 5 or 6 regions. Potential inconsistencies with historical documents. While genetic connections between African populations and individuals from the Americas are strongly correlated with historical documents, a granular breakdown of disembarkation in discrete regions of the Americas identifies discordance. For example, identification by descent with the Bites of Benin and Biafra, as well as Nigerian ancestry, is overrepresented in the United States and Latin America, considering the recorded number of enslaved people that embarked from ports along the coast of present-day Nigeria into these regions of the Americas. However, the discordance is explained by the records from intra-American slave trade and intercolonial trade that occurred primarily between 1619 and 1807, whose impact has recently been understood through collections of port records, newspapers, and merchant accounts from disparate parts of the Americas. Like I stated in the beginning of the video, it's good that you guys get a firm understanding of the intercolonial slave trade, not just the transatlantic slave trade, because you did have slaves being re-exported here in the Caribbean and the Americas. Documented intra-American voyages indicate that a vast majority of enslaved people were transported from the British Caribbean to other parts of the Americas, presumably to maintain the slave economy as transatlantic slave trading was increasingly prohibited. These voyages would spread African ancestry common in British Caribbean to other regions of the Americas that were not in direct trade with specific regions of Africa. In Latin America, transatlantic slave trading voyages virtually ceased between 1660 and 1780. Yet a large proportion of all documented captives continued to be transported throughout the early 1800s to Latin America, primarily from the British Caribbean. In the United States, nearly 10% of total enslaved populations arrived via intra-American trading with the British Caribbean, and consequently, identification by descent between the United States and British Caribbean, primarily the Bahamas, British Windward, and Leeward Islands, is high. Therefore, embarkation out of Africa and IBD between Africa and all of the Americas is correlated, whereas disembarkment in specific regions of Americas and IBD with Africa are not consistently correlated because of the asymmetric transportation of enslaved people within the Americas. Another apparent discordance between historical documents and genetic data is seen in the IBD between most regions of Americas and Senegambia. Senegambia is underrepresented given the overall proportion of enslaved people who were deported from this region to the Americas. This is likely because Senegambia was one of the first African regions in which large numbers of people were enslaved. Historical documentation and the most recent common ancestor estimates from IBD segments support the explanation as well, indicating that Senegambia's connection to the Americas is older and less well documented than that of the other regions. Having distant ancestors from Senegambia would increase the likelihood of people in the Americas sharing a very short identification by descent segment with Senegambians, which in turn may be undetected by estimating IBD segments with reduced SNP densities. This pattern of reduced IBD and older, the most recent common ancestor estimates, is most evident in the disembarkation regions of North and South America and Central America, where, according to records, nearly half of the enslaved people who disembarked at ports in these regions came from Senegambia, but less than 10% of IBD between the regions in Africa is with Senegambia. However, almost no captives from Senegambia disembarked directly in either Northern South America or Central America after 1650, consistent with our finding of an older, most recent common ancestor between Senegambia and these two regions, and likelihood that early African disembarkations resulted in smaller IBD segments between Africans and African Americans to the present day. Underrepresentation of ancestral connections to Senegambia also occurs in regions of the Americas with more recent 1700 to 1865 disembarkation from Senegambia, such as the United States and Latin Caribbean. This pattern in part may result from the increasing rates of deportation of children from Senegambia over time. Enslavement of children in unsanitary conditions in the holds of ships led to high rates of malnutrition and illness, which in turn led to lower survival rates in latter decades of slave trade. It is also possible that Senegambians experienced higher mortality due to dangerous plantation conditions. A large proportion of enslaved Senegambians were rice cultivators who worked on rice plantations in the Americas, which were generally rampant with malaria. Clearing of swamplands was also generally performed by men, which could explain higher male mortality. While detailed records exist for very few plantations, reduced genetic representation of Senegambia and parts of the Americas is likely correlated with Senegambians being forced to work under life-threatening conditions. All right, so that's that on that. As we can see, the reason why we don't see that much Senegambian representation is because of that history there. Let me pull the next article. Sorry, I got discombobulated early. The ADL came after me and shook up things. But we back, man. So as y'all can see clearly that the impact and the genetic impact of the slave trade has been shown. I could keep reading this. It's going into sex bias, more sex bias things as far as the male and female recognition as well. You guys can go read the article in its entirety on your own time. But I also want to share with you guys some of the haplogroups that was here as well, and that was brought up. That's associated with the sex slave trade. So from here, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet, and then I'm going to go to my Kindle, and we'll wrap up. I had more articles, but I'm not going through my list because my computer crashed, but it is what it is. I might wrap it up in a nice bow in a presentation, PowerPoint presentation, at a later date. With that being said, let's look at some of these haplogroups. Now, this is, I believe, the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is what I'm about to share with you guys, and we can see the effects of the slave trade. If my computer cooperates, okay, there we go. I think it's time for me to buy a new laptop. All right, so here it is here. All right, so this is a supplementary table from an article on Plus One dealing with the impact of the slave trade and Y chromosome diversity in the DR. And if you guys can see on the screen, you would notice right here, you see that haplogroup. And this is taken from Y markers analyzed to genotype our Dominican samples. And this is why I want to bring this out. These people evidently are the progeny of slaves. What do you notice? Up top, you can see in this sample, it's A0. This is a haplogroup. Majority of us are not related to haplogroup A. See, we see three samples here, A, A1, A3. We also see another sample, BM60, B1, M236, B2. This is all haplogroup B right here. Quite a few samples, actually. These people could very well be the progeny of the slave trade. We do not relate to them by and large. So just because, and I'm speaking to the Israelite community now, that likes to use Deuteronomy 28 and 68, I know this is going to hurt somebody's feelings. I know this is going to hurt somebody's feelings here. Just because someone got off a slave ship in the Americas does not automatically make them related to you, one. Secondly, make them an Israelite. I'm going to repeat that again. Just because someone got off a slave ship or was a victim of the slave trade, that does not automatically make them a relative of yours, nor does it make them an Israelite. The Israelite community, you got to get that to your head. How do we know this? The answer is on the screen. We can see the different Y chromosomes in the Americas. We can see it. We see haplogroup A. We see haplogroup B. And I hope my brother Hal's watching because I got something for him. I want him to see this. He's still watching. So we see B. Someone in the chat mentioned E1A. We see that as well. We see E1A, ancestral E. We see E1A there, M33. We can see that. Now, what do we see majority of? E1, B1A, M2. You know, in the DR, that we have a high prevalence of E1, B1A there, even though they're racist and colorist. There is a lot of E1, B1A representation to be, brought up. As you can see, quite a few samples. E1, B1A, E1, B1A. What also do we see? Because some people have I saw a video where I think it was G-Con saying that Dante Forson couldn't have been E1, B1B. This comes from a lack of understanding of genetics and a lack of understanding of the impact of the slave trade in gene flow. Because these very well could have been proponents of people that were being captured and caught in the slave trade as well. Now watch this. As you can see, we have quite a few E1, B1B samples here, M215 in the DR. We can attribute this to also a gene flow event happening during the time of slavery. And we also have E2, M3, E2 samples as well, M75, M74. These will all be Shemites. According to our model, DE, the descendants of DE would be Shemites. And we can see them falling within the American slave trade or the progeny of slaves. That's the most likely explanation of E1B1A, E1B1B, and other E markers as well. Now look at this. FM89, GM201. What are these? If you've been following the channel, you should know these are European haplogroups. Now, the article we just read told you that there was a prevalence in Latin America of European haplotypes because there were more males than there were more European males than there were African or indigenous males. So this is why we see FM89G, HIJK, IJK, IJ, I, JM304. Faithful to God just found out he was J. He's J, I believe he's J2. He's of the J2 clade. This is why. This is why he inherited the J2 clade, because he comes from one of those slavers, most likely, that mix with either the indigenous population or the African slave population. One of the two. And that's what we see here in the genetic matrices. And again, this doesn't tell you their phenotype, because a person could look quote unquote African, Africoid, Negroid, and still have a European paternal marker. We see IM170, JM304, J1, J2BM12, J2M172, which I believe Faithful to Gog is, and my brother Mato from New York. Now look at this. You see Q, M242, that's most likely what? Indigenous American. So we do have indigenous American markers still existing to this day in the DR. We see it within the samples. It's rare, but it's there. RM207, that's Western European. Again, we've already explained that. These Europeans came over, had sex with the slaves, had sex with the indigenous women, and they began to do blanqueamiento and started to whiten out the population. See a bunch of R1A and R1B, and you also have an R1B V88 chromosome. Now, hopefully, if you guys have been following the information, where does R1B V88 come from? This is also most likely a descendant of a slave, because you had people with R1B V88 in the Chadic regions. This is important to know this. Everybody that came off a slave ship is not the same. We see it in the genetics. This very well is a descendant of someone from the Chadic region. We do not share the same paternal ancestors as them. Okay? Now, if Hal's still in the building, what do we see at the bottom here? And this is going to explain why you see T here in the Americas. TM184. Which comes from the macro mutation or the founding mutation M70. TM184. You see haplogroup T in the DR as well. You see it in Mexico. You see it in Puerto Rico. You see it in Cuba. These could have also been slaves from North Africa or East Africa as well. All right. So you have a hodgepodge of haplogroups being swept up in the slave trade and being brought over here. Again, this is why you cannot throw out the blanket statement and just say, hey, everybody that came off a slave ship is an Israelite. No, you cannot do that. Everybody does not have the same genetic background and paternal ancestors. All right, from there, let me go to this book. I'm doing this out of order. If y'all was here earlier, the Google Chrome decided to crap the bed on me, so be patient with me. Let me bring out the Kindle book now, and I'm going to explain some E1B1B markers and why we probably see that in America, because we had G-Con say some very incorrect things about a brother Dante Forson and his DNA and why his DNA is in America. Shout out to my brother Ruth Smith. He's E1B1B as well. I'm going to give you some jewels here. Let me share my screen and bring out why we see this E1B1B here. All right, this is the Kindle. This is from a book called Human Migration. And it's very meaty. I want to, before I go to this page, let me see if I got my highlight up here. I was reading this before I out here before I go into this straight quote here on page 145. All right here. So page 141, as you guys can see, says it also attracted immigrants from France and England and employed enslaved Africans in the labor force, which explains the presence of haplogroups R1b. Again, where's the R1b coming from? France and England. These are Western Eurasian markers. E1B1A, E1B1B, and T. Now, you do have a rare occurrence of T in Europe, but this is most likely T coming from Eastern Africa, getting caught up in the slave trade as well. Because I had another article, and hopefully I can pull it up, where the trans-Saharan slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade has an overlap. And 40% of the slaves from the trans-Saharan actually were being deported into the Americas. They were being sold into the Americas. So you can get people from East Africa and North Africa being caught up and sold over into the Americas. Why is that interesting? Let me sidebar real quick. On the channel, we brought up an individual named Billy the Jew. Now, Billy the Jew, if you guys are familiar with him, he said that he came from Madagascar. He said that I descend from Jews from Madagascar. He gave the name of the Jews. This was from his own account, and he was caught up in the slave trade and sold, and he ended up in Carolina. I think North Carolina. No, not North Carolina. He ended up in Virginia. Excuse me. A lot of people was discounting that because they don't understand the slave trade. You don't understand that, one, slaves did come from Mozambique and Madagascar. I brought that out earlier. Two, you don't understand that there was an overlap with the trans-Saharan slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade. Y'all don't understand that. So when y'all hear that history, y'all say, oh, no, he's lying. No, he's recounting his life and what he knows about his origin and how he ended up in the Americas. And it's plausible because we do have genetic evidence that we do see markers coming from Madagascar and Mozambique. We do see those markers. All right, now let me get back to reading this as well. So again, it says it also attracted immigrants from France and England and employed enslaved Africans. As we can see through the markers, the people that were employing the enslaved Africans was most likely R1b. And E1B1A, E1B1B, and T could have all been the progeny of slaves. Now we drop down to the NRY phylogeography, and then I'll go to the next page with the highlight. Overall, Mexican males possess 21 different haplogroups. Most prominent of these paternal lineages were R1b. Listen to this. R1b. Why is R1b so pervasive in Mexican populations? It's because of the blanqueamiento period of time when majority of these European males, like I've been saying throughout the video, came over and slept and outnumbered the either dying males of the indigenous or the African males. That's why it's the most pervasive and prevalent haplogroup, R1b. Then second to that is Q-M3. That's indigenous American. So all you aboriginals out here, go get your DNA test. If you have haplogroup Q, that's pretty much Pan-American. Q-M3, that's Pan-American. So then you'll be like, okay, yeah, I do know I was here in America because my paternal clade says I was. It matches with the Kennewick men. We know who was here because we have ancient samples to verify who was here. Okay, so first it's the R1b, then QM3. Then third, look at the third most pervasive paternal lineage or prominent paternal lineage in Mexico. E1B1B. E1B1B. Are you guys following this? So when you get a dilettante like G. Khan saying, oh, this person can't be E1B1B, He does not understand genetics, and he doesn't understand basic and simple history. That's all it is. These guys are dilettantes. They don't take out the time to purchase the material, read the material, study and digest the material. They just get on the internet and spew rhetoric. All right, so let me get back to the reading. From here, I want to go to page 145 to explain the appearance of some of these E1B1B markers, which we covered on the channel in prior shows, but it's great to touch on it now. The Circo-Mediterranean influences, like the current Mexican population, populations from the Iberian Peninsula exhibit a complex genetic background that is influenced by different historical, economic, and religious events contributing to Spanish biological diversity. Because of the peninsula's geographic position, it was involved in the trade routes extending from southeastern Europe, Greeks, the Middle East, Phoenicians, and North Africa, Carthaginians, modern Tunisia. The genetic contribution of these cultures has delineated through phylogeographic studies of haplogroup I, J1, and J2. So we do see these groups in there. You know, haplogroup I, you see it in Sardinia, you see it in northern Scandinavia, and some of them made its way. It was a gene flow into the Iberian Peninsula. J1 and J2 as well. Some of these groups made its way into the Iberian Peninsula. This is why you see some Puerto Ricans, Latin Americans with haplogroup J. And we know where these markers come from, J1, J2. A lot of these markers related to early Anatolians and Greeks, which according to the Bible would be Javan, would be Japhet. Same thing with haplogroup I. Since the 1st century AD, Jewish populations were dispersed across the Mediterranean and subsequently occupied the north of Spain. The Roman expansion brought with it communities of Jews, some being slaves that expanded into the rest of the peninsula and then were forcibly converted to Christianity during the 13th and 14th centuries. Moreover, the barbarian invasions and subsequent occupations by Germanic Visigoths also contributed to Spain's genetic diversity. During the Muslim domination in the 12th to 15th centuries AD, Arabs and Berbers invaded different regions of Spain. Genetic vestiges of these population movements are reflected in the presence of the lineages like E, G, I, J, M172, and M267, and K, which are quite common in parental populations from which the Mexican mestizo arose, i.e. the Spaniards. So when you see these certain haplogroups in the mix of these genetic matrices of modern Latin populations, this is why. Because of the biological diversity that already existed in the Iberian Peninsula. All right. It says, like the rest of the peninsula, the Andalusian region was influenced by Sephardic Jewish, North African, and Middle East populations, as evidenced by the presence of haplogroups EM81 and V13, G, I, and K. The Berber component of the Muslim invasion and the North African gene flow are evidenced by the presence of haplogroup EM78, EM81, and EV12. Other sublineages very likely contributed by Middle Eastern populations, EV65, as well as Sephardic Jews and Tartars, proto-historical Andalusian civilization, such as E-M34, E-EM123, EM78, and EV13, respectively, are also distributed throughout the peninsula. So, y'all know where I'm going with this. Some of this E1B1B gene flow that we see coming into Americas can be tied to Sephardic Jews. We've been saying this, but we have the genetic evidence to back this up. We see the E1B1B being caught up in the slave trade. I gave you guys the supplementary tables to show you that. alongside its brother E1B1A, and that was something that was a passage into the Prophet's book Hybrid Hate, and he said the Jews in Europe being I'm paraphrasing, the Jews in Europe being persecuted and enslaved and tortured and killed had their brothers being enslaved in the Americas. It's something to that effect. Genetically, we can show that. Because what's the brother clade to E1B1B? E1B1A. Are you guys following? So again, we can attribute some of this E1B1B gene flow coming into the Americas from the Sephardic Jews. As we done in prior episodes, we showed you E-M34 amongst the Cape Verdeans being attributed to Sephardic Jews. In the Massachusetts region, they have a lot of Cape Verdeans. They have a history, or oral history of being Jews. Some of them can make that claim through the E-clade. As you guys can see, on this channel, what we do is we provide the information. These other channels are Wendy Williams, talk shows, give you source material, we disseminate the information. All right? Shout out to the chat. As you guys can see, should I continue to read this? Is there more meat on this? This is a complex genetic legacy. This complex genetic legacy was observed in all Mexican populations, where different sublineages within E1B1B appeared in these Mexican states. Of note, the Mexican haplotypes reveal some genetic influence from Moroccan, Libyan, Tunisian populations. Those are all North African localities. These are all North African localities. So they either came over here by their own will, or these people were getting caught up in the slave trade as well. This is why my brother Ruth Smith would have E1B1B. This is why the other brother Dante Forson would have E1B1B. Most likely they could have came from one of these Sephardic Jews and or relative. All right? And you got people wanting us to drop DNA. Man, you out your cotton picking mind. The DNA is making things much clearer. The DNA is painting a clear picture here. Let me read it again. The complex genetic legacy was observed in all Mexican populations where different sublineages within E1B1B appeared in these Mexican states. Of note, the Mexican haplotypes revealed genetic influence from Moroccan, Libyan, and Tunisian populations. The closeness of these populations and genetic similarity, those from the EXT and BAC and Galatia, could also reflect the Moorish influence in Spain. All right, so again, let me go to the title card real quick so you guys can see this. This is the book that I'm quoting from. I think I quoted 141, 145, 146. Those are the pages. Human Migration, Biocultural Perspectives, edited by Maria de Lourdes Munoz Moreno. This is the source. All right. From there, let's see if I can I got you, Sean. I got you. Don't worry about it. I got you. Because earlier, my Google Chrome crashed. And, let me do this. You guys sit tight. And let me pull up another article real quick. I appreciate every one of y'all. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. You know how we rocking, man. 7 Gang, Source Gang over everything.
Let me work. Please let me work. Get that water. He about to get this work. He about to get this work. Hold up. He gonna get this work. You gonna get this work, nigga. Hold up. He gonna get this work. You gonna get this work, nigga. I killed you. Hold up. He gonna get this work. Hold up. You niggas gonna get this work, you hear me? Me. He ain't even get the second verse, but he gonna get this work. Hold up, man. He gonna get this work. He gonna get this work. He gonna get this work. Hold up, man. Let me work. He gonna get this work, nigga. Watch me work. We gonna get this work. We gonna get this work. Yeah, he gonna get this work. Hold up. He gonna get this work.
All right, y'all. Let me get this source and add a little bit tidbit of information of what I was just bringing out about E1B1A, Brother Clay, E1B1B, being both brought over here as slaves, and then we can connect E1B1B to the Sephardic Jews, which would also make the E1B1A, the relatives, connected to the Sephardic Jews as well. I want to show you guys this quote here, and what I brought, I paraphrased it, but I want to actually get it from the man's book right here. This is Hybrid Hate by Tudor Parfit. And it says, Michaelis argued that in Prussia that there was no use for the Jews. They could not readily be made productive or beneficial, but they could be transformed to rather more useful Negroes. This is in his book. Y'all can see it on the page, man. We deal with source information here. If only of Prussia owned sugar islands, he lamented, Jews could be put to work in the Caribbean, where their non-European origins as a southern race of Asiatic refugees would enable them to engage in hard labor alongside their black brothers in the unhealthy of the slave colonies. Let me read that again. A southern race of Asiatic refugees would enable them to engage in hard labor alongside their black brothers in the unhealthy climate of the slave colonies. Often constructed in the discourse as black, Negro, and servile, Jews once again began to resemble representations of their medieval forebears. This is what the book says. Page 170, Hybrid Hate, Tudor Parfit. I'm taking this quote and what he said, and I'm looking at genetics, and I'm like, I see some similarities there. It looks asymmetrical to me. E1B1A, E1B1B, both caught up in the slave trade. Yeah, Curtis Lee, I know that. I know E1B1A was in Mexico. Matter of fact, I descend from a Mexican. Again, I'm EU290. Which reminds me, I want to share a video with you guys about that. I want to share a video with you guys on that topic as well. I wanted to show you this quote regarding this about Jews being paired with their black brothers in the colonial Americas. Bryant Jones, he says, good presentation, fam. My haplogroup is E1B1A and H2 mitochondrial. Shalom, man. Subscribe to the channel. We do this on the regular, man. We do this on the regular, presenting information. Anthony says, I love how much information is able to be researched versus back in the late 90s. Yeah, man. Like, it's knowledge shall increase. Daniel 12:4. I apologize for my Google Chrome, conking out on me, but I had more. I might bring it out anyway. Let me pull that up and see if I can glean something from this. I had it all sequenced out for you guys. If not, what I'll do in a later presentation, I'm going to just put it in PowerPoint form and wrap it in a nice bow. So I did that one, searching for African roots. Let me see if this is a good one. Hold on. If not, I'll end the show. We pretty much covered a lot of ground here. As you guys can see, we brought out a lot of information in regards to this. E1B1A and E1B1B. We see where the European haplogroups come from. We also established that that we are not aboriginal to the Americas. You understand? We are not aboriginal at all to the Americas. We know who was aboriginal here. And it definitely was not us, Haplogroup Q and Haplogroup C, which I did have an article that you do have some African Americans with C and Q. So I said, some of you guys just need to go take your DNA test, and then you can rock from there. You can probably connect yourself to these different groups. You never know. I appreciate that, Curtis Lee. I appreciate that, man. Much love. Much love, man. I've been doing this for a long time, just coming out of my own pocket. I agree with anything helps, you know what I'm saying? So I might read this next article. Let me get this out. Here, share screen. All right, so this is Searching for the Roots of the First Free African American Community from nature.com by Beatrice Martinez et al. This was published in 2020. It says San Basilio de Palenque is an Afro-descendant community near Cartagena, Colombia, founded in the 16th century. The recognition of the historical and cultural importance of Palenque has promoted several studies, namely concerning the African roots of its first inhabitants. To deepen the knowledge of the origin and diversity of the Palenque parental lineages, we analyzed a sample of 81 individuals for the entire mtDNA control region, as well as 92 individuals, 27 YSDRs, and 95 of 51 Y SNPs. The results confirm the strong isolation of Palenque with some degree of influx of Native American maternal lineages in a European admixture exclusively mediated by men. Due to the high genetic drift observed, a pairwise analysis with available data on African populations proved to be inadequate for determining population affinities. In contrast, when phylogenetic approach was used, it was possible to infer the phylogeographic origin of some lineages in Palenque. Contradicting previous studies indicating a single African origin, our results evidence parental genetic contributions from widely different African regions. Introduction: San Basilio de Palenque is a small town near Cartagena, Colombia, founded by runaway slaves. Keep that in mind, because we're going to go over the haplogroups they found here. At the end of the 16th century, African slaves started to escape from coastal city of Cartagena to take refuge in the nearby region of Montes de Maria, establishing the foundation of the town of San Basilio de Palenque, hereafter referred to as Palenque. Exactly when the city was founded is unknown, but there are studies indicating that this community was already established in the second half of the 17th century and ultimately became the first free African American community in America. All right. Shout out to Dave. Yeah, man. We'll do. Most definitely. Appreciate that. It says here, but there. It says exactly when the city was founded is unknown, but there are studies indicating this community was already established in the second half of the 17th century and ultimately became the first free African community in America. So this is pivotal. You guys need to take notes on that. It said, due to its strategic position located on the north coast of Colombia, Cartagena city was the center of Spanish slave trade and one of the main South American ports of arrival for slaves brought from different regions of Africa. The paucity of historical records make it difficult to establish the exact place of departure of the slaves from Africa. Now, what does paucity mean? Paucity just means the extreme lack of, right? So the extreme lack of historical records makes it difficult to establish the exact place of departure of the slaves from Africa. Nonetheless, it is thought that until the early 17th century, the Africans arriving in Cartagena would have left from the region of Upper Guinea. Later, the Congo and Angola, together with Upper Guinea, would have been the major regions from which slaves were taken to Spanish America. At the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, slaves would have come from several regions, from Senegambia to Mozambique. Remember, I brought that out. You do have slaves coming from Mozambique. All right. It says the village of Palenque is currently inhabited by 4,000 Afro-descendants who maintain a cultural and ethnic identity for more than 3 centuries. The high endogamy and little influence from neighboring communities. With high endogamy means they only marry within their small group. Palenque preserves that the ethnic conscience and cultural traits of African roots, such as social organization, complex funeral rituals, and traditional medical practices, among others. Moreover, it is the only African American population speaking a Creole language with a Spanish lexical base. Due to these characteristics, Palenque was declared by UNESCO as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity in 2005. During the last decade, the recognition of the historical and cultural importance of Palenque has promoted several studies with the aim of reviving its history and searching for African roots of its first, inhabitants. Given the high diversity of slaves arriving in Cartagena, one might suppose that several ethnic groups would be behind the foundation of Palenque. However, this theory has been questioned by linguistic and anthropological evidence pointing to the region between the Congo and Angola. The ancient kingdom of Congo as the region of the first inhabitants of Palenque, with an almost exclusive contribution from a single Bantu ethnic group, the Bakongo speakers of Kikongo. However, cultural and genetic features do not always come together. A few genetic studies have been performed to confirm a single geographic source of the founders of Palenque. The first genetic studies carried out with human HLA markers revealed limited Native American and European gene flow, as well as close genetic distances with African populations, especially from Western Africa. Nevertheless, a higher than expected European input, 38%, was detected when studying a pool of paternal lineages in Palenque. Due to the strong isolation of Palenque, paternal European admixture most likely occurred before its foundation, meaning before they became runaway slaves, they were already admixed with Europeans. It says the results based on autosomal ancestry and formative markers showed approximately 10% European ancestry, supporting a sex-biased European influx. More recently, Ansari et al. Investigated uniparental markers from the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA. According to these authors, the Yombe from the Republic of the Congo is the most likely group from which the original male settlers of Palenque came. Taking together all the genetic evidence available, it is safe to assume that Palenque has preserved a high African ancestry and that European background was essentially mediated by males. Nevertheless, the information available is not enough to clearly assign continental, regional, or origin of paternal lineages that are present in Palenque. Concerning mitochondrial DNA, the results of hypervariable segments 1 did not allow us to determine the continental origin more than 25% of study haplotypes. For the Y chromosome, the available information is also fragmentary. Data available in Nagura et al. For small numbers of samples do not allow us to evaluate founder effects, given the lack of information on Y chromosome-specific short tandem repeats based on the results on Ansari. It is not possible to quantify non-African influx due to low-resolution lineages outside of E1B1A-M2. So they had a lot of E1B1A-M2. This is aiming to obtain deeper knowledge to the diversity and origin of the Palenque parental lineages. In this study, we analyzed the entire mtDNA control region, as well as Y chromosome-specific markers for both maternally and paternally inherited gene pools. We intended to determine the degree of isolation from Native American and European influx based on the comparison with data from African populations. We also intended to contrast hypotheses of a single against multiple African origin. And it gives you materials and methods. Of course, I don't want to go through that. That's all tech talk. Let's go to the results. mtDNA and Y chromosome haplotypes found in this study are described in supplementary tables S2 and S3, along with the corresponding haplogroup classification differences. And MPOP and haplogroup classifications were observed in only one sample, which was classified L2A1 and haplogroup L2A1. The classification for MPOP is supported by a phylotree and has a heteroplasmy at position of 16192. The two subsamples of the Palenque were compared with the means of genetic distances and corresponding non-differentiation probabilities regarding mtDNA haplotypes. No statistically significant difference was found. For the Y chromosome, the PR substamps showed a lower proportion of African Y SNP haplogroups than the PU. However, the differences between subsamples were not statistically significant for Y STR haplotype distributions or Y SNP haplogroups. Based on these results, samples were pulled for the remaining analysis. All right, so I want to get to what they found here. The genetic diversity of the San Basilio de Palenque. So regarding mtDNA, high haplogroup diversity was found. Different haplogroups present in our sample The high haplogroup diversity is, however, associated with a low diversity of haplotypes. A large proportion of haplotypes were shared inside haplogroups, and only 33 haplotypes were present in the study sample. A wide separation of African haplogroups carrying few haplotypes illustrated in the network. The great majority of the samples, 91%, belong to the African macro haplogroup L. The remaining 9% belong to African Native American haplogroups A2, A2, B2, and C1. No European maternal lineages were observed. So what we see in this population of the first African free community on the mitochondrial side, 90% of it was African females, and only 9% was indigenous. It says the high diversity was also found in the Y-SNP haplogroups, with 17 different haplogroups being observed. So within this free community of slaves, the first free African-American community within America, we see a high diversity of Y haplogroups. This is interesting. This is very interesting, right? So watch this. Appreciate that. Great information. Thank you for the dedication and hard work. May the Most High continue to bless you. May the Most High bless you, sister. Let me get back here. So let's deal with more information here. It says, in the whole sample, the African origin can be attributed to 61% of the Y haplogroups. 36% represent European admixture, and 3 samples belong to Native American haplogroup. 3% belong to the Native American haplogroup. The African origins of San Basilio de Palenque lineages. To investigate origins of African lineages in Palenque, we selected subsamples of African haplogroups found both in mtDNA and Y chromosomes. These subsamples were compared with populations from different African regions. A pairwise comparison was performed among all selected populations. Moreover, phylogeographic analysis of African haplogroups in Palenque were undertaken based on haplogroup frequencies and distribution across the African continent, considering the haplotypic profile of each lineage. All right, so I'm going to skip this. I want to get to what they found here. So we saw the mtDNA lineages. Again, they're going over the macro haplogroup L. We brought that out earlier. I want to show y'all what else they found within the paternal lineage, which is going to land back off what I was saying earlier about the gene flow of E1B1B coming into the Americas and its possible connection with Sephardic Jews. I know it's going to make a lot of people upset. So right here, it says phylogeographic analysis of African Y chromosome lineages in Palenque. The African paternal lineages found in Palenque fall into 4 different clades. M13, which we know M13 is haplogroup A. B, haplogroup B, E, and R, comprising 7 haplogroups. The most likely origins of these haplogroups were investigated by comparing the YSTR haplotype profile of samples from Palenque and African populations. In this study, we detected 3 chromosomes classified by YMRCA M13, which this is haplogroup A, which includes samples from haplogroup A. Haplogroup A is virtually restricted to the African continent, reaching the highest frequencies in the Khoisan-speaking populations. It is also frequent in the Nilotic groups from the East and Northeast Africa, and is sporadically observed in the Southeast and Southwest populations. Some lineages inside clade A have geographic specificity. For instance, lineages belonging to haplogroup A1M31 were described in West Africa, differing from these eastern part of the continent that belong to haplogroup A3M13 or to other lineages inside A3. So we can see here in the male lineages within the first free African American group of runaway slaves that we have a component of haplogroup A. Again, this goes back to my point I made prior. You can't say that everybody that came off a slave ship or was a victim of the slave trade are the same or are Israelites, because we have different paternal backgrounds. And according to our model, haplogroups A and B would be Hamites. All right. So let's get back to it. It says to infer the most likely origin of haplogroup A samples found in Palenque, a network was built including YSTR profiles of 2 samples from this study. and those from 109 haplogroup A samples compiled from the literature. The network constructed depicts a clear separation samples to haplogroup A1M31, A3M13, including all samples from East Africa, from Northeast Africa, one sample from Benin, and one from Equatorial Guinea. And A3M28, including 4 samples from Northeast Africa, Central African, Bantu, and Pygmy samples from Ghana and Cameroon, not type Y SNPs inside haplogroup A, separated into 2 clusters, not overlapping A1M31, A3M28, and A3M13 clusters. The 2 samples from Palenque, which share the full Y filler plus profile, stand between A1M31 and A3M28 clusters. Although it's difficult to point to an origin of the haplogroup found in Palenque, we can at least exclude that they came from the East, Southeast, or South Africa regions. For historical reasons, it is more likely to assume an origin in the West rather than Northeast Africa. The closest West African branch to the Palenque haplotypes correspond to samples from Guinea-Bissau belonging to haplogroup A and 31. So now it's going to explain haplogroup B. Haplogroup B is present exclusively in sub-Saharan African populations, except for recent migration to other continents. Haplogroup B2B chromosomes are found at their highest frequencies among pygmies and also frequent in Khoisan, with some lineages being virtually restricted to hunter-gatherer groups. In contrast, subclade B2A is widely dispersed throughout sub-Saharan Africa. The presence of this haplogroup in different African regions was attributed to the dispersion of Bantu speakers. Nevertheless, recent studies showed that haplogroup B2A was already present in Khoisan groups before the contact with Bantu-speaking populations. We identified 3 samples belonging to B2A in Palenque, all lacking the M109 derived allele usually present in Southwest, Southeast, and South Africa Bantu. All right, so I'm going to just go to the point where they pinpointed it. If you guys wanted to read the entire article, you can on your own time. But it says the results attained are thus compatible with a single founder who could have been brought from the ports of Luango in modern Gabon or Cabinda in the ancient kingdom of Congo. Now, what is that? Why is that interesting about Luango? If you guys have been following Tutor Parfit and his works, sorry, you funny. For the Kleenex stop file. If you've been following his works, you will see the legend of the Luango Jews and the history behind that as well. So we do see that slaves were coming from that region from this article. But this particular slave is from haplogroup B, or these 3 samples from haplogroup B. Clade E is the most common clade in Africa and is also present in European and Western Asian populations. In accordance with the Palenque African background, this clade represents 61% of Y lineages and 82% of those assigned to African origin. The haplogroup E1B1B M81 is frequent in North Africa, particularly in Berber groups, and also present in Iberia and southern Italy as a Northwest African legacy. Since no direct gene flow from North Africa has been reported, the presence of this haplogroup in Palenque populations most likely resulted in European admixture. You see how they deduce that? So, this is European admixture. This is very well could be slave. This could have been gene flow from the slave trade as well, or this could be a Sephardic Jew, as we brought out earlier. Nonetheless, a North African origin of EM81 in Palenque via Western Africa cannot be ruled out. Again, this could be from the slave trade. A European origin was also attributed to E1B1B M123 lineages found in Palenque. So, again, you find E1B1B lineages in the first free African American group. You find them there. So again, when you have an individual that speaks on, these people can't be E1B1B because you only associate E1B1A with the slave trade, you don't understand the slave trade, especially on a genetic level. All right, so as we can see, we do find these samples within the free community of Palenque. This haplogroup is absent in sub-Saharan Africa and frequent in Arabian populations in Northeast Africa and the Middle East. This haplogroup also spread in Europe, although at low frequencies in Iberia, has also been associated with Middle Eastern, North African, and Jewish ancestry. A direct origin in Africa can be attributed to the remaining E haplogroups in palinque. And I also want to say this right here. You see that right there? This haplogroup also spread in Europe, all through at low frequencies in Iberia. It has been associated with Middle Eastern, North African, and what does that say there? Jewish ancestry. So this goes with what I was bringing out earlier, right? What I brought out earlier about the Jewish ancestry and E1B1B, and that being a gene flow from Iberia into the Americas, we do see that. Also, let me show you this source too as well. Let me finish this. I'm going to show you another source. A direct origin in Africa can be attributed to the remaining E haplogroups in palinque, E1A M33, E1B1A M2, E1B1A M191, and E1B1B M35, which are not present in European populations and more likely brought to America during the slave trade. So we do see E1B1B being associated with the slave trade. Apart from E1B1B M81, E1B1B M123 attributed to European influx, aside the E1B1B clade, we found 3 samples belonging to E1B1B M35. Although in an African origin, this lineage is more likely, we cannot exclude the hypothesis that it came from Europe as a rare E1B1B M35 subclade. Were detected in populations Western Mediterranean regions, namely Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy. E1B1B M35 is present in Eastern Southern African population. It was not detected in the Central Southwest regions, namely Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and Angola. Although it was described in West Africa at low frequencies. The E1B1B M35 network shows many separated branches, some of which are restricted to single African origin. The high diversity and wide dispersal in African populations is explained by a low resolution of data available and most likely represent diverse E1B1B M35 sublineages. From the network, we can see that samples from palinque, represented by a single haplotype, are positioned in a branch that is rooted in a haplotype shared between the sample from Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. Apart from the samples from palinque, this branch comprises 1 sample from Senegal, 1 from Benin, 3 from Guinea-Bissau, and 2 from Burkina Faso. The results obtained are thus compatible with the single founder, who is more likely to have come from a region between Senegambia and the Bight of Benin than from other African regions. The 2 examples from E1A M33 were found in the palinque, corresponding to 3.45% of African chromosomes. This haplogroup is present exclusively in West Africa. The highest frequencies reported were in the region of Mali and Burkina Faso, with gradually decrease in frequency towards the south. It was not detected in the eastern and southern populations. A network was built available on 77 samples. Again, you guys can read that on your own. Since one of the Y chromosomes more likely to have come from the region of Upper Guinea, the origin of other Y chromosomes more likely somewhere along the line of Bight of Benin. Then, of course, it ends with haplogroup E1B1A M2 and its sublineages, widely spread in Africa and highly prevalent in all Bantu sub-Saharan populations, with frequencies above 80% in most populations. In the palinque, 45% of the samples, 74% of the African samples belong to haplogroup E1B1A M2 and to a subclade E1B1A M191. The extremely high number and diversity of samples that can be included in these haplogroups did not allow us to resolve the reticulation obtained in the networks that are not shown. Therefore, for these 2 haplogroups, we carried out a match analysis between haplotypes found in palinque and those reported in African populations from the same haplogroups. All right. From there, I'm going to end it here. It says identical haplotypes found mainly in populations south of Cameroon. Therefore, these lineages most likely come from African west coast between the Luango and Angola, and River Luango being a hotspot for Jews. All right. With that, I'm going to give y'all one more source, then we out of here. All right. I'll give y'all one more source in regards to the Jewish ancestry comment being tied to this E1B1B gene flow. All right, so watch this. Let me pull up my Nook app. I believe it's in the Nook. Yeah, it's my Nook app. And I'm going to read to you guys. Let me stop sharing my screen. What it says here in this book here. And again, all these articles, just go back, rewind, pause, and you can pull up these articles on your own time and read them for yourselves. But I want to give you guys the meat and potatoes of the actual article. All right, let me open my Nook app, and I want to share this one last source with you guys to explain the Jewish ancestry comment. Okay, right here. Let me that's what's going on. I got too many tabs open. Hold on real quick. Let me close some of this down. Adobe Digital. All right. Let me share my screen. Give you this last tidbit of information. And share the entire screen. And here we go. So this is from a book. I'll give you the title here in a minute. But this section right here is the enslavement of Haitian Taino. The European Christians arrived in 1492, already accustomed to slavery, as described above, and they cold-bloodedly enslaved the indigenous people who lived on the island. Archinegas, 1946, explained at the beginning of the conquest, every Spaniard was allowed to take with him an enslaved person from his European community, and the number rose later to 20 enslaved people per Spaniard. At that time, Jews purchased from the slave market were taken to Haiti. Let me read that again. At that time, Jews purchased from the slave market was taken to Haiti. So this event may explain the E1B1B gene flow as well. And of course, Sephardi's have E1B1A as well. But I wanted to bring this out to the forefront because the article brought up that E1B1B could be a result of Jewish ancestry. Also, if you go in the same book, it says here, right here, it says, according to Thomas, European slavery occurred differently in different religious contexts. For example, Christian law did not permit Jews to have Christians as slaves, although many Jews were slaves with Africans in the Spanish market. All right. As you guys can see that, and we just read here, at that time, this is the colonial period of the Americas, Jews purchased from the slave market were taken to Haiti. As y'all can see, let me get you guys the title of this book real quick. Open my Nook. Right here, The Healing in the Homeland, Haitian Voodoo Tradition by Margaret Mitchell Arman. And that's page 58 to page 60. That's where you can find that quote. And with that, that's the end of it. That's the end of the presentation. I hope you guys got something out of it and learned about the genetic imprint of the slave trade. We went over a lot, discussed a lot to address the three communities. To the Israelite community, what I want you to get out of this video is that everybody that came off a slave ship is not an Israelite. As we clearly can see through the genetic data. We clearly see that everybody does not share the same Y chromosome, meaning we can clearly not go back to Abraham. We all can't go back to Abraham. If we're teaching the Israelite paradigm, we have to do it sufficiently. To the Aboriginal community, this is what I want you to understand. We do not belong in America. We're not Paleo-Americans. We are not the original autochthonous inhabitants of America. We know this because the slave trade was the largest mechanism to bring majority of us over here. Okay? And we know this by examining the DNA. We share the same Y haplogroups as modern Western African groups and Central African groups. So we have a common ancestry with them. We do not have a common ancestry with Kennewick man, which was haplogroup Q. And to the Afrocentric community, stop shying away from genetics because the genetics elucidate ancestry. And as we can see, we're not all one entity, one uniform entity. A lot of us have different haplogroups, and that's okay. Majority of us are E1B1A, but you also have E1B1B. Some of you guys are T, some of you guys are I, some of you guys are G. And as we explained through the genetic imprint of the slave trade, those European markers come from these slave owners sleeping with the African female servants or slaves or indigenous women. All right. So that's my message to you guys. I might look at a few things here in the chat, but I'm getting ready to close this down. Let's see what you guys are saying. Let's see what y'all are saying here. Terry Smith says, am I Israelite, Tartar, Jew, Iraqi Jew that keeps marching limbo? This is what I will say to you, because I think this is you up here as well. In GEDmatch, I typed in Tartar, and it said it was an African American in Limba. It was African American Limba, although my haplogroup was QM242. I believe it's Middle Eastern because when I compare my DNA to the Iraqi Jews, it said Limba. Hey, I don't know what clade that QM242 is, but I can solve that for you real quick. Well, with it being haplogroup Q, this is what I'm going to tell you. Like I said earlier, your ancestors could have been absorbed into a Jewish group. There is no consanguinity in modern Jewish groups. They have several haplogroups. They have K, they have L, they have T, they have J, they have E. Several haplogroups within it. So is it possible that your forefathers ingratiated themselves with other Jews? Yeah, and they began to keep the culture and pass that down? Yes. But this is a resource that you need to keep in mind. Everybody on the channel, if you want to search any haplotype, any haplogroup, this is what you do. Genetic Homeland Introduction and the home page right here. So you can go to genetichomeland.com. Up top on the toolbar, click DNA Pedigree. After you click DNA Pedigree, scroll all the way down. You see where it says Pedigree Search? Type in the mutation there. So your mutation is QM242. So I'll just put 242. And I'm searching on the Y chromosome, not the X. Search. And it'll give you the breakdown of your haplogroup and where did it arise. All right, so you come from the Altaic region, M242, define a mutation for haplogroup Q, K2B2A1, originated about 30,000 BCE. Britain's DNA labeled this branch Altai and formerly Yenisei. So you come from the Altaic region, most likely that's where you're from, or where your ancestry goes back to, most likely. Again, you can go to this website and check any clade that you want. I also want to make note that P is the father of R and Q. So you see right here, haplogroup QR, ancestor haplogroup Q and R, which is haplogroup P. So the Western Europeans, were coming over here and destroying and killing off haplogroup Q, which is a Pan-American haplogroup. They were actually killing their relatives. They were going against their relatives and just didn't know it. But genetically, they share a common stock. All right. So you do have Q in the Altaic regions and Siberia. And then you have a clade that's specific to the Americas that branched off from it. That's all. In our model, you would be a descendant of Japhet because you come from CF. But is it possible that you were with Jews and your family ingratiated themselves with Jews? Yes. And absorbed with Jews? Yes. Highly plausible. But when we're saying, do you descend from Abraham? That's implausible or most likely unlikely from my research. All right, what else are you guys saying in the comments? Let's see. Oh, his brother said he a 49ers fan. yeah, Genesis 49ers. I came up with the name because I was involved with an organization where we put a lot of emphasis on the 49 chapter of Genesis, and I thought about the San Francisco 49ers, and then I pretty much made a culmination of both of those ideas together, because Genesis 49ers is supposed to be an identifier for Israelites, so I named my channel to Genesis 49ers. Let's see what else you guys are saying in the comments before I get out of here. Total Rabban. Okay, this is just comments. Yeah, source gang, man. Source gang, source up and shut up. Yap. It's all about that yap, man. We're gonna put yap on the map. You heard me? Let's see. What else you guys saying, man? Yeah, man. I've been footing that bill by myself for a long time. Shout out to Ramal Yahoo Yap Gang in the building. You hear me? Let's see. Shout out to Brian Jones. He says he's Haplogroup E1B1A. And look at his phenotype. This is why you can't judge people off appearances. E1A, I would just always say what I always say. Shemitic. Dorville, I pretty much read up on this. There's no ancient specimen with haplogroup D if you're talking about the paternal side. If you're talking about the maternal side, yes, there are maternal markers here, A through D and X2A amongst Paleo-Americans. But haplogroup D was postulated to be over here, but we have no evidence. They say that they either died off or something happened in the early migration event that we are not privy to. All right, so with that being said, I think I don't see anything else in the comments. We're going to end here. Shalom to everybody. Yeah. I'm red. I'm fairly red on that doorbell. I understand about haplogroup D. Because the argument goes, they made it to Japan. Why not America? I understand the argument. With that being said, let's end this. Go ahead and end this, man. Source Gang, 7 Gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And we working here, bro. We working. We giving out information. You know what I'm saying? And we feeding our people with source material. All right.
Yeah. Over your robot. Yo. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. This is a keepsake, ayy. And you can keep that tucked away. Some gon' come with the lies. Remember them when you pray. Some gon' cry when they die. But you don't worry about the K. Look, I done whipped up away. My time is short, so I'm living today. That shit was real. What happened to them slaves? Ay, but you gotta be brave. This a land of the free. Gotta move like waves. Ay, put the pen to the pad. I give them path for the rage. Then I put them on the path. to take them all off the stage. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper. This is a keepsake, ayy. You can use this right away. Some gon' come with the truth. Honor them when you pray. Some gon' laugh about their life. They don't worry about delays. Look on them with the way that level's real. When you can use it today, don't worry about how you're gonna get paid. Lord, give it free, take it away, ayy. Don't you wanna be free? Remove that rage. There's a path to the light, don't misuse those ways. We float with the truth, gotta move like waves. I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You know I'm a keeper, I got a visa, that's one swipe. The change of demeanor, I got that all money, baby. That bitch came with a beeper, cold as a freezer. I heat up in my leisure, I feel like a fever, baby. You should know that I'm a keeper.
All right. Someone asked me, Terry Smith said, my contact information. If you want to get in contact with me, your best bet is going to be by going through our Facebook group. If you have a question or comment, you can go to the Facebook group. There's a link there. Click that link. And for anybody that doesn't know about the Facebook group, let me share my screen. We'll warn you, it's not a safe place for people that scoff. I did not make this group for people to scoff. I made this group for people that have genuine questions and want to learn and want to obtain source material. This is the group here, Genesis 49ers Resources. Not my old Genesis 49ers group, but this group here, Genesis 49ers Resources. And the link is on the screen, as you can see. Click that link, type in that link, and you can come here. And as you can see, we update this. People ask questions. We try to get back to your questions and answer your questions. But I update this regularly with sources. See, I brought this out. For anybody asking about early Americans, I brought a source about Kennewick men and his haplogroup being Q-M3. This brother shared a source about the Mandi people. I brought a source out about the olive skin, where people falsely attribute olive skin to pale skin, which is not true. The earth being inundated with brown skinned people first, or quote unquote black people. So as you can see that we put in work here. Levantine-like ancestry found amongst Bantu populations are associated with the Bantu expansion. Haplogroup E being postulated to have its origin in Asia, and also with haplogroup D. So again, join Genesis 49 Resources. It's a lot easier for me to put a source here and explain it here, and quicker than upload it on YouTube. All right, so I'll leave it on the stream for quick second, and you can see it. Genesis 49ers Resources. The link is in the chat. Join now, and if you have any questions, this is the best way to reach me. All right, so we out of here, man. Source Gang, 7 gang over everything. You know how we rocking, man. 7 candlesticks up, man. We've been telling y'all. It ain't a debate. It's a stick up gang.